Meantime, a number of pharma stocks turning higher after an early slump this morning as the president outlines this executive order to lower the cost of prescription drugs. Joining us this morning is former FDA Commissioner, CNBC contributor, Dr. Scott Gottlieb. Scott, good to have you back. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
A lot of discussions about how this would work, if it is able to work, and then sort of a revisitation of the criticisms that they made of Kamala Harris during the campaign about price control suggestions and proposals. What do you make of it so far?
Well, look, I think the question is what this is in this instance. I think this is a statement of policy intent. They clearly plan to try to pursue some policies to bring down drug pricing and try to bring equilibrium to the prices in the U.S. and in Europe. The most substantive piece of the statement today was a nod towards drug importation. Remember, there's a scheme that's been in place since the first Trump administration to import drugs from Canada. It has some strict provisions in it to try to guarantee the provenance of those drugs to make sure that counterfeits couldn't get into that pharmaceutical supply chain as drugs were imported from Canada, and put conditions on wholesalers that were importing the drugs. And those conditions were so stringent, it was so difficult to bring in drugs while still guaranteeing the integrity of the pharmaceutical supply chain, that no drugs have largely flowed through that mechanism. It is possible for them to try to resurrect that and apply it to a broader set of countries, but so long as they put in place and maintain the same kinds of provisions to try to make sure the pharmaceutical supply chain doesn't get infiltrated by counterfeits, I think that's going to be a very difficult policy to try to pursue at scale. The other things that they could do, and they seem to make a nod to it in this executive order today, is try to do some policies through Medicare where they would, for example, import most favored nation pricing, so European pricing, into the IRA, or maybe try to do a demonstration project through CMMI, another thing they tried to do in the first Trump term that was ultimately struck down by the courts because they tried to take a more expansive approach to it. They could do a more tailored approach that might pass muster with judicial review. But I think by and large, this is an opening for the pharmaceutical industry to approach the administration, go back to a policy that was pursued in the early 2000s with drug makers committed to try to launch drugs at tiered pricing globally, where they had 3 different prices, one for high-income countries, one for middle-income countries, one for low-income countries. And the administration, the Bush administration at the time, in return, agreed to try to negotiate into free trade agreements provisions that would prevent countries from compulsory licensing drugs when, in fact, the U.S. pharmaceutical companies tried to negotiate this tiered pricing. Ultimately, the Bush administration got that into the Australian FTA, but they didn't go much further, and I think by and large the companies backed away from the policy of tiered pricing. There were also at the time some companies that launched drugs at a single world price. So I think this is an opportunity for the companies to go in, try and negotiate that kind of a remedy with the administration and get the administration to try to take this up as a matter of free trade agreements. Another thing that they nod to, in fact, in this EO.
Yeah, well, that would make sense then, Scott. I mean, is it a fair contention that, in fact, we have been subsidizing, for example, the prices of drugs for people who live in Europe?
Well, look, there's no question that real prices are higher in the U.S. on the whole than they are in Europe, although sometimes in Part D the discounting is so significant that the price that's extracted in the U.S. is actually lower than the price that some European authorities get. Remember, you have to look at the real price and not just the list price. So the actual differentials aren't as large as they seem, but there's no question there are differentials. If you start to adjust that pricing for GDP per capita, a lot of those differentials go away, or they at least come down substantially. And in fact, in the first Trump term, when we looked at the most favored nation policy, or what we were calling IPI at the time, when we would adjust those prices for GDP per capita, there weren't as big differentials. So, products are priced in different markets based on what consumers are able to pay. And certainly when you're dealing with a public health good, you don't want to outright deny it from a market. And so the companies sell it for what they can get in those various countries. And remember, a lot of these countries impose utilization restrictions in exchange for this preferential pricing. So what they'll say is if you come into a country in Europe and you don't give them a good price, they'll just put limitations on who can access the drug, ultimately denying their population access to a potentially life-saving pharmaceutical. So I think there's a lot of challenge for companies going into a country and saying, we're just not going to sell you the drug at all, when in fact the drug may be a curative cancer drug.
Yeah. Scott, finally, I'd just like to get your opinion, a lot of emerging biotech companies are the ones that certainly gain funding to develop drugs that ultimately, if they actually hit, get acquired by the big pharma companies, such as one of the ones you're on the board of, Pfizer. Do you think the twin pressures of both this on drug pricing and what we're seeing at the FDA are going to mitigate capital formation for some of these biotech companies?
Well, look, I think it already is mitigating capital formation. The IRA's done that as well. It's taken money out of R&D budgets. I think the tariffs would hit cash flows severely if, in fact, the president goes forward with tariffs on drugs manufactured in Ireland, where a lot of branded drugs are manufactured. The slowdown at FDA is certainly having an impact, and the recent appointment of someone who has been hostile to the approval of cell and gene therapy products. So I think the combined effect is having an impact on the industry, more on the valuations right now than on the cash flows. But the cash flows are coming down. That's going to ultimately mean that R&D budgets probably also have to get cut to offset those losses.
Scott, appreciate it.